My $25,000 custom wedding gown was completely ruined just 20 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, but it was the best money I ever spent. Why? Because as that permanent black ink bled across the delicate white silk, I finally saw my best friend's true face. Mia had spent weeks plotting to turn me into a humiliated mess in front of my billionaire in-laws, hoping I'd walk down the aisle looking like a stained disaster. I let her think she'd succeeded, but the victory she was tasting was nothing but a cheap imitation. A calculated decoy, a few staged tears, and the result was the most satisfying moment of my life, watching my loyal best friend smirk behind her hand while she destroyed a $49 dress I'd found on a clearance rack. To understand why the woman I called my sister for 15 years wanted to sabotage my happiest day, I have to take you back through the blueprints of our friendship. I'm Olivia, 28 years old, a fashion executive who built my career on spotting flaws in a design before they become catastrophes. I've always been the one who handled the crisis, the one who stayed logical while everyone else panicked. My best friend, Mia, also 28, was a freelance stylist, which was really just a title she used while I paid her rent, covered her bar tabs, and handed her my designer hand-me-downs. What Mia didn't tell our circle of friends was that she was drowning in the envy of everything I had worked to achieve. For 15 years, I had carried her, a structural burden that defied all common sense. I could secure a promotion or buy my first apartment, and it didn't matter, Mia would find a way to make my success feel like a personal insult to her. If I won an award, she'd remind me of a mistake I made in college. If I bought a luxury bag, she'd accidentally spill coffee on it. But her jealousy reached its absolute terminal velocity the moment Julian, a tech heir with a soul as solid as his bank account, slipped a 5-carat diamond onto my finger. That was the moment she stopped being a friend and started becoming a wrecking ball. The air in the bridal suite was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the underlying metallic tang of hairspray, a fragrance that usually signaled the pinnacle of a woman's happiness. For me, it was the smell of a trap being sprung. I sat perfectly still in the velvet vanity chair, my back to the door, watching Mia through the reflection of a gilded trifold mirror. She was moving with a frantic, forced helpfulness, her hands trembling as she adjusted the hem of the gown I was wearing. "Oh, Olivia," she whispered, her voice a fragile reed of fake emotion. "You look so perfect. Almost too perfect. I just want everything to be flawless for you." I saw her hand slip into the deep pocket of her bridesmaid robe. I knew exactly what was in there, a permanent, industrial-grade felt tip marker, the kind used to label shipping crates. I had seen her practicing with it on a swatch of white silk via the hidden security feed just 12 hours ago. She wasn't looking for a stray thread, she was looking for her target. "I just need to fix this one little spot on the train," Mia said, her voice rising in pitch. She knelt behind me, her body shielding the fabric from the rest of the bridesmaids who were busy in the corner with the champagne. Then came the accident. With a sharp, jagged motion, Mia lurched forward. I felt the slight tug of the polyester fabric as the heavy nib of the marker dragged across the lower back of the skirt. There was no sound, just the internal scream of a woman who had finally confirmed her best friend was a predator. "Oh my God. No. Olivia, I'm so sorry." Mia shrieked, her hands flying to her face in a rehearsed display of horror. I stood up slowly, turning to face the destruction. A jagged, 6-inch black streak burned through the pristine white of the gown, a permanent scar on what was supposed to be my crowning glory. The other bridesmaids gasped, the room falling into a sudden, icy silence. Mia was already on her knees, sobbing with a theatrical intensity that would have been impressive if I didn't know the script. I tripped. My makeup pen. I didn't realize the cap was off. "Olivia, please, I've ruined everything. I'm the worst person alive," she wailed, her eyes darting up to see the impact of her blow. She was waiting for the collapse. She was waiting for the fragile Olivia she had spent years cultivating to break down into hysterics, effectively ending the wedding before it could even begin. But I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I looked down at the black ink, then back at Mia. I felt a cold, architectural clarity settle over me. This dress, this $49 polyester stunt gown I had bought at a warehouse clearance sale, was currently doing exactly what I designed it to do. It was acting as the lightning rod for Mia's malice. "It's okay, Mia," I said, my voice as steady as a marble column. I reached down and patted her trembling shoulder, feeling the heat of her frantic heartbeat through her robe. "It's just a dress." Mia's sobbing hitched. She looked up, her expression a confused blur of smeared mascara and genuine shock. This wasn't the reaction she had calculated. "But, it's your gown, Olivia. It's $25,000. It's ruined. We can't fix this. Julian's family, they'll think you're a mess." "I'm not a mess, Mia," I said, leaning in closer until our faces were inches apart. I let a small, sharp smile play on my lips, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "In fact, I've never felt more in control. Why don't you go find some club soda or a stain remover? Take your time. I'll just sit here and reflect." She scrambled out of the room, her sobs continuing until the door clicked shut. The moment she was gone, the air in the room seemed to clear. I looked at the black stain one last time. It was a masterpiece of betrayal, a visual representation of 15 years of hidden resentment. Mia thought she had just written the final chapter of my wedding day. She had no idea she had just provided the opening scene for her own public eviction. I stood up and began unzipping the ruined polyester. The oops moment was over. Now, the real architecture of my revenge was about to begin. The golden child of my social circle thought she had buried me. She didn't realize I was the one who had built the grave, and the real $25,000 silk and lace gown was waiting for me in the secret annex across the hall. As I sat in the silence of the bridal suite, staring at the black ink bleeding into the cheap polyester of the decoy gown, I realized that the stain was merely the most recent entry in a ledger that had been in the red for 15 years. To Mia, our friendship was a line of credit that never expired. To me, it had been a structural obligation I mistook for loyalty. We had met in a cramped freshman dorm, two girls with big dreams, but with vastly different foundations. I was the one who pulled all-nighters in the design studio, my fingers calloused from shears and needles, while Mia networked at parties. When her father lost his job sophomore year and her tuition check bounced, I was the one who handed over my hard-earned internship savings. I told myself it was what sisters did. I didn't see the flicker of resentment in her eyes as she took the money, a quiet, simmering anger that she needed help from someone she considered her equal. That was the beginning of the 15-year debt. By our mid-20s, the pattern was a permanent fixture of our dynamic. When we moved to the city, it was my name on the lease of a high-rise apartment she could never afford. I paid the security deposit, the utilities, and the grocery bills, while Mia pursued creative consulting roles that never seemed to materialize into a paycheck. I let her live rent-free for 3 years, convinced that I was being a supportive friend. In reality, I was building a cage of comfort that Mia grew to hate me for. I remembered the time I received my first major promotion to junior fashion director. I had come home, radiant and clutching a bottle of vintage champagne to celebrate. Mia had barely looked up from her laptop. "That's great, Liv," she'd said, her voice flat. "I guess it's easy to get promoted when you have the corporate look they want. Some of us are just too edgy for the glass ceiling." That night, she accidentally dropped my celebratory bottle, shattering it across the hardwood floor and soaking my favorite silk rug. I had cleaned up the glass while she offered a half-hearted apology, never questioning why her clumsiness always seemed to coincide with my victories. The emotional debt was even heavier. I was the 3 a.m. phone call for every toxic breakup she orchestrated. I was the one who proofread her resumes and bought her the suits for interviews she never showed up to. I treated her like a project that just needed one more coat of paint to be perfect. I never realized that every time I pulled her up, she felt like I was pushing her down. To a narcissist, a helping hand is just a reminder of who is standing higher on the ladder. By the time Julian entered the picture, the debt had reached a terminal balance. Julian didn't see a struggling artist when he met Mia, he saw a parasite. He was the first person to point out the cracks in the foundation. "Why does she only call you when she needs a wire transfer, Olivia?" he had asked one evening after Mia had forgotten her wallet at a 3-star Michelin dinner for the 4th time in a row. "She's just going through a hard time," I had defended. "She's been my best friend since we were 18. "No," Julian had replied, his voice grave. "She's a habit you need to break." I looked down at my hands, still steady despite the chaos. I had spent 15 years paying for Mia's life, only for her to try and bankrupt my soul on the one day I asked for nothing in return. She thought she was the one who was owed. She thought the world, and specifically my world, owed her a spotlight. But as I stood up to strip off the ruined decoy, I knew the debt was finally being called in. The interest had accrued for over a decade, and the cost of settlement was going to be the only thing Mia had left, her place in my life. I had been the load-bearing wall for her entire existence. Now, I was going to step out from under her and watch the entire structure of her world come screaming down. The evening Julian proposed was designed with the same structural integrity he applied to his tech empire, flawless, luminous, and seemingly unbreakable. We were on the private terrace of a villa overlooking the Amalfi Coast, the Mediterranean air tasting of salt and expensive jasmine. When he dropped to one knee and opened a velvet box, the 5-carat emerald-cut diamond didn't just sparkle, it commanded the light. It was a promise of a future built on solid ground, a far cry from the shifting sands of my life with Mia. The moment I returned to the city, the ring felt like a heavy, beautiful secret on my finger. I wanted Mia to be the first to know. I wanted the woman who had shared my cheapest ramen and my most expensive heartbreaks to share this triumph. I invited her to our favorite rooftop lounge, ordering a bottle of Krug to mark the occasion. I held my hand out, the diamond catching the city's neon glow, expecting a scream of joy or a tearful hug. Instead, Mia stared at the ring with a cold, predatory stillness. Her eyes didn't move to mine, they stayed locked on the stone, calculating its market value against her own empty bank account. "Wow," she finally said, her voice lacking the resonance of genuine happiness. She took a long, aggressive gulp of the champagne that cost more than her monthly phone bill, which I had paid only 3 days prior. It's definitely big. A bit new money for my taste, but it suits you, Liv." I felt the first hairline fracture in the foundation of our friendship. I tried to laugh it off, pulling my hand back. Julian wanted something classic. "I'm just happy he wants to spend his life with me." Mia leaned back, a sharp, jagged smile stretching across her face. "Well, you have to hand it to him. Julian is a genius, right? He's spent his whole career finding undervalued assets and fixing them up. I guess he applies the same logic to his dating life." The music in the lounge seemed to dim as the insult landed. "What is that supposed to mean, Mia?" "Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive," she said, waving a hand dismissively. She let out a dry, rattling laugh. "It's a compliment. Most guys in his bracket go for the supermodels or the heiresses, the high-maintenance types. But Julian? He went for the safe option. The girl who works too hard and says thank you for everything. I always knew he had low standards for women, but I didn't realize he'd actually commit to them." The air between us curdled. It wasn't just a joke. It was a tactical strike. Mia was reframing my engagement not as a romantic victory, but as a result of Julian's perceived failure to find someone better. It was her way of reminding me that in her eyes, I was still the invisible girl in the dorm room, someone who was only chosen because the real prizes were out of reach. "He chose me because he loves me, Mia," I said, my voice dropping to a level, architectural coldness. Sure, she said, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "And because you're the only one who won't challenge him. You're the perfect billionaire's accessory, functional, quiet, and grateful. Just don't get too used to the private jets, Liv. Men like that eventually realize they can afford the upgrade." She toasted me then, the crystal clinking against my glass with a sharp, dissonant sound. I watched her over the rim of my champagne, seeing for the first time that the supportive best friend was a facade held together by the hope that I would never actually surpass her. By marrying Julian, I wasn't just moving out of our shared apartment, I was moving out of her reach. And if Mia couldn't reach me to pull herself up, she was going to reach out to pull me down. I looked at the diamond on my finger. It was the hardest substance on earth, capable of cutting through glass. I realized in that moment that I would need to be just as hard. The crack in the friendship had formed, and as I watched Mia reach for the bottle to pour herself another glass she wouldn't pay for, I knew the structural failure of our relationship was no longer a possibility, it was an inevitability. The atelier was a sanctuary of hushed luxury, an ivory-walled fortress where the air felt thick with the scent of French lace and the quiet hum of industrial sewing machines. I had invited Mia to the final fitting because, despite the low standards comment, the 15-year habit of including her was hard to break. I wanted to believe that seeing the physical manifestation of my joy would finally soften her. I was wrong. When the head seamstress pulled back the heavy velvet curtain, the light caught the gown, and even I felt a sharp intake of breath. It was a $25,000 architectural marvel of heavy Italian silk and hand-stitched Chantilly lace. The bodice was structured like a second skin, boned with surgical precision, while the skirt cascaded in a structural waterfall that defied gravity. It wasn't just a dress, it was a statement of my new reality. It was the armor of a woman who was no longer playing small. I stood on the pedestal, the cool silk draping over my frame, and looked at Mia in the mirror. I didn't see a friend admiring a bride. I saw a predator evaluating a rival's stronghold. Mia's reaction was a physical twitch, a sharp, involuntary jerk of her jaw that she tried to mask with a cough. Her face didn't brighten, it tightened. Her eyes didn't sparkle, they narrowed, darting across the delicate lace of the sleeves with a frantic, scanning energy. It was the look of a person looking for a structural flaw, or perhaps, a place to create one. It's a lot of fabric, isn't it? Mia finally said, her voice sounding thin and strained. She stood up and walked toward me, her hand reaching out. I watched her fingers. They weren't open in a gesture of affection. Her thumb and forefinger were pinched together, as if she were testing the tensile strength of the silk, or looking for a way to snag it. She lingered on the waistline, her touch hovering just an inch above the hand-beaded pearl work. The lace is so delicate, she whispered, her voice dropping into a low, unsettling register. One wrong move, one snag on a ring or a jagged nail, and the whole thing would just unravel. It's almost a shame to wear something so vulnerable, Liv. You have to be so careful. You have to be perfect. She looked up at me then, and for a fleeting second, the mask of the best friend slipped entirely. Behind her eyes was a hollow, echoing void of envy, a realization that no amount of her creative consulting or networking would ever put her in a room like this, wearing a garment like this, unless it was on my coattails. I'll be careful, I said, my voice sounding like a gavel in the quiet room. The dress is stronger than it looks, Mia. It's reinforced from the inside. Just like me. Mia's hand dropped, and she forced a brittle, jagged laugh. Of course. You're the architect, right? Always building things to last. I just worry, you know? Sometimes the most beautiful things are the easiest to destroy. It's a tragedy of design. She turned away to look at the price tag on the secondary veil, her fingers twitching with a nervous, manic energy. I stood on that pedestal and felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I realized then that she wasn't just observing the dress, she was coveting the destruction of it. To Mia, the $25,000 masterpiece wasn't a symbol of my love for Julian, it was a target. I looked back at the mirror, at the structured silk and the reinforced lace. I saw the beauty, but for the first time, I saw the risk. Mia had seen the masterpiece, and in her mind, the only thing better than owning it was being the one who saw it fall. I made a silent vow right then, I would wear this dress, and I would walk down that aisle, but I would have to build a fortress around it that Mia could never breach. The memory of my promotion dinner 6 months ago surfaced with the bitter clarity of a bad vintage. We were at the Glass House, an over-designed sanctuary of chrome and candlelight, celebrating my appointment as the youngest senior fashion director in the firm's history. I was wearing a vintage Dior sheath dress, ivory, sculptural, and worth 3 months of Mia's unpaid rent. It was a trophy of my hard work, a physical manifestation of the ceiling I had finally shattered. I remembered the way the light caught the rim of Mia's glass as she stood up to give a toast. To anyone else, she looked like the proudest friend in the room. But I saw the way her gaze didn't land on my face, it landed on the pristine white silk of my shoulder. To Olivia, Mia began, her voice projecting a warmth that didn't reach her eyes. The girl who always knows how to play the corporate game. Here's to many more years of you being exactly what they want you to be. It was a backhanded compliment, a verbal barb wrapped in a velvet tone, but before I could even process the slight, the accident occurred. Mia's hand made a sudden, sharp jerk, a movement that defied the laws of physics for someone who wasn't even tipsy. The glass of heavy, deep purple Cabernet didn't just spill, it was launched. The liquid hit my chest like a physical blow. The cold, wet stain bloomed across the Dior silk with the violence of a gunshot wound. The table went silent. The high society guests we were with froze, their eyes wide as the red wine dripped onto the white linen tablecloth. Oh my God. Liv. I'm so sorry. Mia shrieked, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of horror. She scrambled for a cloth, but instead of dabbing the stain, she began to rub it, hard. My heel caught on the rug. I'm such a klutz. I've ruined your beautiful dress. I looked down at her hands. She wasn't trying to save the fabric, she was grinding the tannins deeper into the fibers, ensuring the Dior would never be wearable again. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide with a frantic, faux innocent energy, but behind that mask, I saw a flicker of something terrifying, satisfaction. Stop, Mia, I said, my voice sounding like ice cracking in a glass. I caught her wrist, my grip firm. You're making it worse. I was just trying to help, she cried, pulling her hand away and beginning to sob. You always make me feel so incompetent. It was an accident, Olivia. Why are you looking at me like that? In that moment, the architecture of our friendship shifted. I began to mentally scroll through the ledger of our 15 years. The accidental deletion of my senior thesis from the shared computer. The clumsy spill of coffee on my first interview suit. The misplaced keys the morning of my flight to the Paris fashion show. These weren't the stumbles of a chaotic soul, they were the calculated demolitions of a structural rival. Mia's accidents were a clockwork mechanism, timed to strike the moment I stood in the spotlight. She couldn't handle the shadow my success cast on her own stagnancy, so she tried to dim my light with whatever liquid or loss she had at hand. That night at the Glass House, I ended up leaving early, wrapped in a borrowed waiter's jacket, while Mia stayed to finish the bottle of wine I had paid for. As I sat in the back of a cab, watching the city lights blur, I realized that I wasn't dealing with a friend who had bad luck. I was dealing with a saboteur who used her own clumsiness as a weapon of mass destruction. The Dior was a total loss, but the lesson was invaluable. Mia didn't want to be at the table with me, she wanted the table to collapse while I was sitting at it. And as I thought about the $25,000 wedding gown currently being finished in the atelier, I knew that wine would be the least of my worries. Mia wasn't just coming for my clothes anymore, she was coming for the life I was building, and she would use every oops in her arsenal to tear it down. The night before the wedding, the Vesta estate was a fortress of quiet luxury, but for me, it was a laboratory. Julian had insisted on the highest level of security for the bridal suite, not because he didn't trust the staff, but because he understood that in our world, value attracts predators. I sat in the corner of the darkened library, the blue light of my smartphone illuminating my face as I calibrated the new security app. The cameras were pin-sized, hidden within the ornate crown molding of the suite, designed to capture every angle of the $25,000 masterpiece resting on its mannequin. I was expecting to see a maid fluffing pillows or a florist delivering the midnight lilies. Instead, the motion sensor chimed a low, melodic ping that felt like a warning bell. I tapped the live feed. The room was bathed in the soft, amber glow of the night lights. Mia was there. She wasn't supposed to be in the suite. She had claimed she was heading to bed early with a tension headache. But on the screen, she looked remarkably vibrant. She moved with a silent, predatory grace, her eyes fixed on the gown. She didn't approach it with the reverence of a bridesmaid. She approached it with the clinical focus of an assassin. I watched, my breath hitching in my throat, as Mia reached into the pocket of her silk robe. She didn't pull out a lipstick or a phone. She pulled out a thick, black industrial marker. I recognized the brand. It was the kind used by contractors to mark steel beams, permanent, waterproof, and utterly destructive to organic fibers. She didn't move toward the dress immediately. Instead, she reached into her other pocket and pulled out a small swatch of white silk. It was a remnant from my first fitting, a piece of the same Italian fabric that draped the mannequin. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched her uncapping the pen. The sound of the cap clicking off was silent on the video, but in my mind, it sounded like a hammer being cocked back on a gun. With a slow, deliberate motion, Mia pressed the nib of the marker into the silk swatch. She didn't just scribble, she tested the flow. She watched the ink bleed into the fibers, her face illuminated by the malevolent satisfaction of someone who had just found the perfect weapon. She dragged the pen across the fabric in a jagged, violent streak, then held it up to the light, admiring the permanent scar she had created. She looked toward the gown, the marker still gripped in her hand. For a terrifying second, I thought she was going to do it right then. I almost stood up to scream, to run down the hall and tackle her. But then, she stopped. She looked at the door, then back at the dress, and a slow, sickening smile spread across her face. She capped the pen and tucked it back into her pocket. She wasn't going to do it now, in the dark, where no one would see. She wanted an audience. She wanted to be there to comfort me when the accident happened. She wanted to watch the light go out of my eyes in real time. I sat in the dark library for a long time after the screen went black. The structural integrity of my friendship with Mia hadn't just failed, it had been demolished by a premeditated act of war. This wasn't a clumsy spill or a mistake. This was a calculated strike designed to ruin the one day I was finally standing on my own 2 feet. I felt a cold, crystalline anger replace the shock. An architect doesn't just watch a building collapse, they redirect the force of the impact. Mia thought she had the only weapon in the room. She didn't realize that by testing that ink on my fabric, she had handed me the blueprints to her own destruction. I took a deep breath, my fingers flying across the screen as I sent a high-priority message to my lead designer. The ink was permanent, but so was my resolve. Mia wanted a show? I was going to give her one she'd never forget. But the dress she was going to destroy wouldn't be the masterpiece. It would be the bait. The clock on the library wall struck 1 a.m., the sound echoing like a tolling bell through the silent estate. My heart was a cold, rhythmic pulse against my ribs. I hadn't slept, and I wouldn't. An architect doesn't sleep when they discover a fatal flaw in the foundation, they get to work. I slipped out of the library, the hem of my silk robe hissing against the marble floors as I made my way to the service entrance. A black town car was waiting in the shadows of the vineyard. 10 minutes later, I was back at the atelier. The closed sign was still in the window, but the lights in the back were blazing. Elena, my lead seamstress, a woman whose hands had spent 40 years turning dreams into silk, was waiting for me. She didn't ask questions. She had seen the security footage I'd sent her, and her face was a mask of old-world indignation. "You want the ghost, Olivia?" she asked, her voice a low rasp. "I want the ghost," I replied. "I want a gown that looks like the $25,000 masterpiece from 10 feet away, but has the soul of a clearance rack tragedy. I want it to be a lightning rod." We spent the next 4 hours in a fever of frantic creation. while the real gown, the Italian silk, the hand-beaded Chantilly lace, was locked in a high-security vault in the basement, we began the construction of the stunt gown. We used industrial polyester, the kind that creaks when you move and reflects light with a cheap, oily sheen. We mimicked the structural lines of the original, using stiff horsehair braid to copy the architectural drape of the skirt. Elena's fingers flew, pinning and tucking with a violent precision. We didn't need it to be perfect, we needed it to be convincing under the soft, flattering lights of the bridal suite. We used hot glue instead of hand stitching for the lace appliques. We used plastic boning instead of surgical steel. It was a hollow monument to Mia's betrayal, a dress built for the sole purpose of being destroyed. She will think she has won, Elena whispered, biting off a thread with a sharp snap. She will see the silhouette and her envy will blind her to the quality of the thread. That's the plan, I said, running my hand over the stiff, scratchy polyester. It felt like the truth, cheap, synthetic, and fake, just like the 15 years of friendship Mia had offered me. By 5 a.m., the stunt gown was finished. We packed it into a nondescript garment bag. The plan was a game of high-stakes misdirection. I would bring the decoy into the suite as the final version, while the real masterpiece would be smuggled back to the estate by Elena herself, hidden in a floral delivery van, and stashed in the secret dressing annex behind the chapel. I looked at the decoy one last time. It was a masterpiece of deception. To anyone else, it was a wedding dress. To me, it was a cage. I was building a trap made of lace and lies, and Mia was going to walk into it with her permanent marker held high. The architecture of revenge must be precise, Olivia, Elena said, her dark eyes meeting mine. If you flinch when she strikes, the whole structure falls. You must let her ruin this. You must let her believe she has broken you. I won't flinch, I promised. As I drove back to the estate in the gray light of dawn, the stunt gown sat in the seat beside me like a silent co-conspirator. I felt a strange, chilling peace. For years, I had been the one fixing Mia's messes, reinforcing her ego, and carrying her weight. Now, for the first time, I was the one setting the stage. I was no longer the victim of her accidents. I was the architect of her exposure. The sun began to crest over the Napa Hills, casting long, sharp shadows across the vineyards. The wedding day had arrived. The stage was set, the decoy was in place, and the permanent ink was waiting. I walked back into the bridal suite, draped the polyester ghost onto the mannequin, and waited for the monster to wake up. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of the Vesta estate, but the light felt cold, reflecting off the stiff, polyester surface of the decoy gown. I sat at the vanity, allowing the makeup artist to apply a layer of foundation that felt more like war paint. I was silent, my movements economical and precise, the behavior of a woman focused on a structural deadline. But to Mia, my silence was a vulnerability to be exploited. I watched her in the mirror as she moved through the suite like a shadow. She had sensed the shift in the barometric pressure between us. My usual warmth, the constant "Are you okay, Mia, and do you need anything?" had been replaced by a clinical, architectural distance. I saw her huddle with Sarah and Chloe, the other bridesmaids, in the corner by the mimosa bar. She leaned in close, her voice a practiced, theatrical whisper that was designed to carry just far enough for me to hear the edges of it. "I'm just so worried about her," Mia breathed, her eyes darting toward me with a look of manufactured pity. "Olivia hasn't been herself for weeks. The pressure of marrying into a family like Julian's. I think it's finally breaking her. She's becoming so erratic. Cold. Almost delusional." Sarah frowned, looking over at me. "She seems fine to me, Mia. Just focused." "That's just the mask," Mia countered, her hand gripping her champagne flute so hard her knuckles turned white. "Yesterday, she was talking about hidden cameras and people out to get her. It's classic paranoia. I've been her best friend for 15 years. I know the signs of a total nervous breakdown. I'm honestly scared she's going to snap before she even hits the aisle. If she starts acting out or... I don't know, seeing things, We just need to be ready to handle her. The gaslighting was a masterpiece of covert demolition. She wasn't just preparing to ruin my dress, she was preemptively ruinous of my credibility. By labeling me mentally unstable and paranoid, she was ensuring that when she eventually accidentally ruined the gown, any accusation I made against her would be dismissed as a symptom of my supposed collapse. She was building a narrative where she was the long-suffering saint and I was the hysterical bride. She told me she didn't even trust the seamstress, Mia continued, her voice dripping with sickly sweet concern. She's been acting like everyone is a saboteur. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love lose their grip on reality like this. Just keep an eye on her. If she has an episode, don't argue. Just agree and call me. I felt a surge of crystalline fury, but I didn't let a single muscle in my face twitch. I simply picked up my glass of water and took a sip, the coolness grounding me. I saw Sarah look at me with a flicker of doubt in her eyes, the first crack in the foundation of my support system. Mia's poison was working. She was isolating me, turning my bridesmaids into wardens under the guise of being helpers. Lev? Mia called out, her voice suddenly bright and artificial as she stepped toward me. Honey, you're staring into space again. Do you need a sedative? I have some in my bag. You look like you're a million miles away. I turned my head slowly, meeting her gaze. I didn't look at her like a friend, I looked at her like a foreman looks at a condemned wall. I'm exactly where I need to be, Mia, I said, my voice echoing with a low, steady resonance. I'm just admiring the view. You'd be surprised how much more you can see when you stop trying to fix everyone else's problems and just observe. Mia flinched, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she smoothed it back into place. See? This is what I mean, she whispered back to the others, just loud enough. The coldness. It's a defense mechanism. She's right on the edge. She thought she was setting the stage for my public humiliation. She thought that by the time she struck, no one would believe a word I said. But as I looked at the decoy gown, I realized her gaslighting was actually helping me. The more unstable she convinced everyone I was, the more shocking the truth would be when I finally revealed it. She was digging her own grave, and all I had to do was stand back and let her finish the work. The atmosphere in the bridal suite had curdled from celebratory to claustrophobic. The air conditioning hummed a low, clinical drone, struggling against the humid heat of the morning and the heavy tension that sat in the room like lead. Every time a bridesmaid laughed or a cork popped, the sound felt brittle, shattering against the walls. My mother and the other girls had been ushered out toward the gardens for the preliminary photos, leaving me in the center of the room with the polyester ghost. Mia had orchestrated this isolation with the skill of a seasoned strategist. She had volunteered to stay behind, claiming my train needed a specialist's hand and that I was too fragile to handle the bustle of the full group. She had physically moved Sarah and Chloe toward the door, her hands fluttering with a nervous energy that she framed as protective. Now, the heavy oak doors were shut, and it was just the two of us, the architect and the demolitionist. Finally, Mia breathed, her voice dropping the sugary facade now that the audience was gone. A moment of peace. You're so wound up, Liv. I can see your pulse in your neck. Just stand still and let me get you into this masterpiece. She walked toward the mannequin where the stunt gown hung. In the harsh morning light, the cheapness of the fabric was almost screaming, but Mia's eyes were clouded by the dark fog of her own intent. She didn't see the stiff horsehair or the hot glue seams, she only saw the target. I stood on the circular pedestal, my back turned to her, my skin crawling as I felt her hands begin to lift the dress. I've been waiting for this day for so long, she whispered, her breath hot against the back of my neck. 15 years, and here we are. The big finale. I stepped into the dress, the polyester creaking as it slid over my skin. It felt cold and synthetic, a shroud of lies. As I stood there, I could feel Mia behind me, her movements deliberate and slow. She wasn't just zipping a dress, she was savoring the proximity to the kill. I watched her in the mirror, her face a mask of intense concentration. Her left hand steadied the small of my back, while her right hand hovered near the deep pocket of her robe. "You know, Julian is going to be so surprised," she murmured, her fingers fumbling with the hidden zipper. "Everyone is expecting you to be this perfect, untouchable ice queen. But weddings have a way of becoming messy. Life has a way of staining even the best laid plans." "Is that what you think, Mia?" I asked, my voice a calm, level line in the silence. "That things just happen to people? I think some people are born lucky, and some people have to make their own luck," she snapped, her tone momentarily sharpening like a blade. She recovered quickly, forcing a light, airy giggle. "But don't worry about that today. Today is about you. I just need to reach in here and grab a safety pin. I think the lining is snagging." I saw it then. The slight shift of her shoulder, the way her elbow flared as she reached deep into her robe. She wasn't looking for a pin. She was reaching for the industrial marker, the weapon she had tested on my silk remnants in the dead of night. She thought she was isolating me to protect me from the eyes of others, but she had actually isolated herself in my trap. The tension in the room was a physical weight, a structural load that was reaching its breaking point. I could hear her heart racing, or perhaps it was mine, a rhythmic countdown to the moment of impact. She moved her hand toward the lower back of the skirt, her body blocking the view from the mirror, her eyes darting to the door to ensure we were still alone. "Stand perfectly still, Liv," she whispered, her voice trembling with a sick, ecstatic anticipation. "This is going to be a moment you'll never forget. I promise." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I looked straight ahead at my reflection, seeing the woman I used to be and the woman I was becoming. I was the architect of this moment, and I had provided the canvas. Mia thought she was about to ruin my life with a single stroke of ink. She had no idea that she was currently holding the pen that would sign her own eviction notice. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, waiting for the feeling of the nib against the fabric, the final, irreversible evidence of a 15-year betrayal. The silence in the room was so absolute I could hear the rhythmic ticking of the vintage clock on the mantel, sounding like a countdown to an explosion. Mia was positioned behind me, her shadow stretched long across the ivory rug. I could feel her kinetic energy, a frantic, vibrating heat that radiated off her body as she leaned into my personal space. This was it, the moment the 15-year debt was supposed to be settled in her favor. "I just need to get this one last hook," she muttered, her voice thick with a strange, breathless excitement. In the mirror, I saw her hand move with the sudden, jagged violence of a snake strike. She didn't slip. She didn't stumble. With a deliberate, heavy-handed lunge, she drove the industrial marker into the small of my back and dragged it downward. I felt the friction of the felt nib as it tore across the stiff polyester, the ink soaking instantly into the synthetic fibers. It wasn't a small dot or a stray line, it was a jagged, 8-inch scar of permanent black venom. "Oh. Oh my God. Olivia." Mia's voice erupted in a practiced, high-pitched shriek of manufactured terror. She recoiled, her hands flying to her mouth, the marker already vanished back into the depths of her robe with the speed of a professional magician. She stumbled back, her eyes wide and brimming with fake tears, but I caught the momentary flash of pure, ecstatic glee in her pupils. For a split second, the mask was gone, and I saw the true face of her soul. She looked like she had just won the lottery. I tripped. My pen, I was trying to mark the hem for the seamstress and I slipped, she wailed, her voice rising to ensure it carried through the heavy oak doors to any staff in the hallway. "The ink! Olivia, look at the ink. It's everywhere. It's permanent. Oh, I'm the most horrible person on earth. Tell me it's not ruined, please tell me it's not ruined." I didn't turn around immediately. I stood perfectly still on the pedestal, looking at my own reflection. I saw the way the black ink was already blooming, bleeding out at the edges on the cheap polyester. It looked like a rot spreading through a dead thing. "Olivia? Why aren't you saying anything?" Mia's voice dropped an octave, her faux panic shifting into a desperate need to see me break. She stepped around to my side, her face twisted into a mask of pity. Lev, honey, look at the dress. It's destroyed. We can't wash this out. It's industrial ink. You can't walk down the aisle like this. Julian's mother, the press, oh, God, what are we going to do? I turned my head slowly, meeting her gaze. I saw the sweat on her upper lip and the way her fingers were trembling with the adrenaline of her success. She was waiting for the collapse. She was waiting for me to fall to my knees, to sob, to scream, to cancel the wedding and prove her gaslighting correct. She wanted a broken bride. It's a very dark stain, isn't it, Mia? I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of the jagged edges of grief she expected. It's a disaster, she cried, throwing herself onto the velvet chaise lounge in a display of dramatic mourning. I've ruined your life. I've ruined everything. I'll never forgive myself. How could I be so clumsy? How could I be so stupid? I stepped off the pedestal, the polyester creaking with every movement. I walked toward her, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear cross her face. She expected a victim, she didn't know how to handle a judge. You're right about one thing, Mia, I said, leaning over her until she was pressed into the cushions. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I spoke with the quiet, structural weight of a foundation settling into place. It is a disaster. But not for me. You see, an architect always knows when a building is being sabotaged. And they always have a backup plan for when the accidents start happening. Mia's sobbing stopped abruptly. She looked up at me, her eyes darting frantically. What are you talking about? You're in shock, Liv. You're not making sense. The dress is ruined. Look at it. I am looking at it, Mia, I replied, a small, cold smile finally breaking across my face. And I'm realizing that $49 was a very small price to pay to see exactly who you really are. I turned my back on her and walked toward the secret annex door. The oops moment was over. The ink was dry. And Mia had no idea that she had just spent 15 years of friendship to destroy a piece of trash, while my real future was waiting for me just 10 feet away. I heard the heavy oak doors rattle as the other bridesmaids returned, their laughter dying in their throats the moment they crossed the threshold. The timing was architectural. I took a sharp, jagged breath and let my shoulders slump, transforming my body from a pillar of strength into a portrait of total collapse. Olivia? What happened? Sarah's voice was a frantic spike of alarm as she ran toward the pedestal. I didn't answer. I simply turned my back, allowing them to see the jagged, black scar of industrial ink cutting through the pristine white of the skirt. A collective gasp echoed through the suite, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window, my frame trembling with sobs that were actually the vibrations of a dark, simmering laughter I had to keep buried. Oh, it's all my fault. Mia wailed, launching herself back into her performance with renewed vigor now that she had an audience. She rushed to my side, her hands fluttering around my shoulders like a moth to a flame. I was trying to help her with the hem. I had my marker for the place cards. I slipped. I'm a monster. Olivia, please say something. I turned slowly, my face a carefully constructed mask of grief. I had rubbed my eyes just enough to make them appear bloodshot, and I let a single, silent tear track through my makeup. I looked at Mia, and for a second, I saw it, the glint of absolute, triumphant power in her eyes. She was savoring this. She was drinking in my ruin like it was the finest vintage. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the day the high-flying Olivia finally hit the ground. How could you be so careless, Mia? Chloe snapped, her voice trembling with anger as she inspected the stain. This is permanent. It's right in the center. We can't hide this with a bouquet. The ceremony starts in 15 minutes. I know. Mia cried, burying her face in her hands to hide the fact that she wasn't actually crying. I'll do anything. I'll give her my dress. I'll go find a cleaner. Olivia, I am so sorry. I've ruined your dream. I've ruined your life. She reached out and pulled me into a consoling hug. I felt the stiffness of her body, the electric thrill of her victory. She whispered into my ear, a sound meant only for me, "It's okay, Liv. You can just tell everyone you were too stressed. We can cancel it. I'll stay with you. I'll be the only one here for you." It was the ultimate gaslight, the predator offering a cage and calling it a sanctuary. She wanted me to retreat, to hide, to let her be the hero of my tragedy. She wanted Julian's family to see a broken, incompetent girl who couldn't even keep her dress clean for an hour. I think I need to be alone, I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. I looked at the bridesmaids, my eyes wide and hollow. Please. Just give me 5 minutes. I need to figure out how to tell Julian that I've destroyed his wedding. Of course, honey, Sarah said, her eyes welling with sympathetic tears as she began to usher the others toward the door. We'll be right outside. Mia, come on, let's go find some lace or a brooch to try and cover it. No, Mia insisted, her grip on my arm lingering for 1 second too long. I should stay. I'm the one who did this. I need to be here when she breaks. Out, Mia, I said, my voice barely a breath. Please. I can't look at you right now. That was the line that sealed her triumph. Mia nodded, a look of profound, fake sorrow on her face, but as she backed toward the door, she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug of her shoulders, a victory lap in silk. She thought she was leaving me in a room with a ruined life. She thought she had finally balanced the ledger. The door clicked shut, and the silence of the suite returned, heavy and expectant. I waited exactly 10 seconds. Then, I stood up straight. I wiped the single tear from my cheek and shook out my hair. The devastated bride evaporated, replaced by the architect who had just finished the most difficult part of the demolition. I looked at the black stain on the cheap polyester. It was a beautiful sight, the physical evidence of a 15-year lie. Mia had given me exactly what I needed to cut her out of my life forever. She had provided the motive, the weapon, and the witnesses. Now, it was time for the reveal. I walked toward the hidden panel in the dressing annex. My real life was waiting on the other side of that door, and it was going to be spotless. The click of the heavy oak door was the sound of a final bolt sliding into place. I stood in the center of the suite, the devastated bride mask falling away to reveal a face of cold, architectural iron. I didn't waste a second. I reached for the side zipper of the polyester decoy, the $49 shroud that had successfully absorbed 15 years of Mia's poison, and stepped out of it, leaving it in a crumpled, ink-stained heap on the floor. It looked like the shed skin of a life I was finished living. I walked toward the back of the suite, where a floor-to-ceiling mirror was built into the ornate wood paneling. To anyone else, it was a decorative feature. To me, it was a structural necessity. I pressed a hidden release near the baseboard, and the panel swung inward with a silent, heavy grace. The secret dressing annex was cool and dim, smelling faintly of cedar and the ozone of high-end air filtration. And there, standing in the center of the small room under a single, sharp spotlight, was the masterpiece. The real $25,000 Italian silk and hand-stitched Chantilly lace gown stood on its own custom form, untouched by malice or ink. The fabric seemed to breathe in the low light, the pearls shimmering with a deep, organic glow that the polyester decoy could never have mimicked. It was reinforced, structured, and perfect. It was the physical manifestation of my own resilience. I stepped into the silk, the cool weight of the fabric feeling like a homecoming. There was no creak of cheap fibers here, only the soft, expensive hush of high-grade textiles. As I pulled the gown up, the internal corset, the structural skeleton I had insisted upon, locked into place, holding me with a firm, unyielding strength. I reached behind me, my own fingers navigating the silk-covered buttons with a precision Mia could never sabotage. I looked at myself in the annex mirror. The contrast was staggering. The woman who had been cowering on the pedestal 5 minutes ago was gone. In her place was an architect who had just finished her most complex build. The gown didn't just fit, it felt like a declaration of war. I could hear muffled voices from the main suite. Mia had returned, no doubt with a bottle of club soda and a fresh set of lies. I heard her frantic calling of my name, the sound of her searching for the broken girl she thought she'd left behind. Olivia? Liv, honey? I found some stain remover. Open the door. I stayed in the shadows of the annex, watching her through the tiny gap in the panel. She was standing over the discarded decoy, her back to me. Even from behind, I could see the set of her shoulders. She wasn't worried. She was gloating. She nudged the ink-stained polyester with the toe of her shoe, a gesture of pure, casual disrespect for a life she thought she had successfully dismantled. Olivia, she called again, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of concern. Don't be dramatic, sweetie. We can try to fix it. Just come out. I didn't answer. I reached for my veil, a 12-foot cathedral length of gossamer lace, and secured it to my hair. It felt like a battle flag. I checked my reflection one last time. My eyes were clear, my skin was glowing, and my foundation was unshakable. I wasn't just switching dresses. I was switching realities. Mia had spent 15 years trying to keep me in a world of accidents and imperfections, a world where I was always one spill away from ruin. But as I stepped back into the main suite through the hidden door, moving so silently that she didn't even hear me enter, I knew that world was gone. She was still standing over the decoy, her back to me, clutching a wet cloth like a trophy. I took a deep, steadying breath, the silk bodice expanding with me. You're right, Mia, I said, my voice echoing through the room with a cold, crystalline authority. We can't fix that dress. But then again, why would we want to? Mia spun around, the cloth dropping from her hand. Her jaw didn't just drop, it seemed to lose its structural integrity. She looked at me, at the shimmering silk, the flawless lace, and the $25,000 truth, and for the first time in 15 years, she was the one who couldn't find the words. The heavy, iron-wrought doors of the Vesta Estate Chapel stood between me and the final act of my architectural reclamation. Behind me, the bridesmaids were a flurry of panicked silk, but Mia was a statue. She stood 3 paces back, her face a horrific shade of ashen gray, her eyes darting from my pristine, shimmering train to the door of the bridal suite we had just vacated. Her brain was clearly misfiring, trying to reconcile the ink-stained wreckage she had left on the floor with the $25,000 vision of silk and light currently standing before her. But, how if she whispered, her voice a cracked, jagged thing. The marker. I saw it bleed. You were crying, Olivia. I didn't turn to look at her. I kept my gaze fixed on the oak doors. An architect always builds a prototype before the final structure, Mia, I said, my voice low enough only for her to hear. I just didn't think you'd be so eager to destroy a $49 imitation. The wedding march began, the deep, resonant pipes of the organ shaking the very floorboards beneath my feet. This was the vibration of a new foundation. The ushers gripped the handles, and with a synchronized, heavy pull, the doors swung wide. The gasp that rippled through the 300 guests wasn't just a reaction to a beautiful bride, it was a wall of sound, a collective intake of breath that signaled the arrival of something transcendent. I stepped forward, the heavy Italian silk of my real gown whispering against the stone floor. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass caught the hand-beaded pearls on my bodice, casting a halo of fractured light around me. I looked like a woman who had never known a day of grief in her life. I walked with a slow, deliberate cadence, my head held high, my eyes locked on Julian at the end of the aisle. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe, but also with the knowing smirk of a man who had watched his wife outbuild a master saboteur. Behind me, the bridal procession followed. I could feel Mia's presence like a cold draft. As she walked behind me, clutching her bouquet of white roses with knuckles that were white with tension, she had to endure the whispers of the guests. They weren't whispering about her clumsiness or my breakdown. They were whispering about how perfect I looked, how untouchable I was. I caught sight of Julian's mother in the front row, a woman who lived and breathed high society standards. She was beaming, her eyes shining with pride at the woman her son had chosen. If Mia's plan had succeeded, that look would have been one of pity or disdain. Instead, the low standards Mia had mocked were nowhere to be found. Every person in that room saw exactly what I wanted them to see, a woman of substance, structure, and absolute grace. Mia's meltdown was silent but total. In the reflection of the glass-encased candles lining the aisle, I saw her face. She looked ghostly, her mouth slightly agape, her eyes wide with the frantic realization that she had played her hand and lost everything. She had exposed her malice to me, she had ruined her own reputation in the bridal suite, and she had nothing to show for it but a stained robe and a pocket full of ink. She had spent 15 years thinking she was the one holding the blueprints to my life, that she could smudge the lines whenever I got too far ahead. But as I reached the altar and Julian took my hand, his grip warm and solid, I looked back at her for one final, chilling second. The golden child of our friendship was gone. In her place was a woman standing in a chapel she couldn't afford, at a wedding she had tried to kill, watching the woman she envied most ascend to a height she could never reach. The dress was flawless. The bride was unshakable. And Mia was finally, structurally, irrelevant. The scent of incense and expensive wax filled the air as I stood at the altar, my hand resting firmly in Julian's. The organ music faded into a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that precedes a final judgment. Behind me, the wedding party settled into their positions, but I could feel the heat of Mia's presence like a fever. She was vibrating with a desperate, frantic energy, her world having tilted on its axis the moment I stepped into the light. As the minister began the opening blessing, Mia saw her opening. With the practiced grace of a devoted best friend, she stepped forward, reaching out to supposedly adjust the 12-foot cathedral veil that trailed behind me. To the 300 guests, it looked like a moment of tender care. To me, it was the final approach of a cornered predator. She leaned in, her face inches from my ear, the smell of her nervous sweat cutting through the floral notes of my bouquet. Her fingers gripped the delicate lace of my veil with a white-knuckled intensity, a silent threat that she could still pull, still tear, still destroy. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Mia hissed, her voice a low, jagged rasp that vibrated with pure venom. "You played me with that fake dress. But I know who you really are, Olivia. I'll tell everyone. I'll tell Julian's family about the real you, the girl who's so insecure she has to set traps for her best friend. I'll make sure this marriage is a cage of doubt before the honeymoon even starts. You haven't won, you've just made me an enemy you can't afford." I didn't flinch. I didn't let the smile falter on my face. Instead, I turned my head just a fraction, leaning back into her space so my words would hit her with the weight of a falling beam. "I saw the footage, Mia," I whispered, my voice a cold, architectural strike. "I watched you on the security feed last night, testing that industrial marker on my silk. I watched you rehearse your accident like a pathetic, third-rate actress." I felt her hand go limp against the lace. The air left her lungs in a sharp, audible hitch. "The markers, the ink, the gaslighting, it's all recorded," I continued, my eyes fixed forward on Julian, who watched the exchange with a calm, steady protection. "I've already sent the files to my lawyer and the Vesta security team. So, go ahead. Enjoy the reception. Eat the cake I paid for and drink the wine you didn't earn. Because the moment we drive away, you're being trespassed from the estate. I've blocked your number, I've alerted your landlord that the rent payments are stopping today, and I am finally, officially, calling in your debt." I pulled my veil gently but firmly from her frozen fingers. "This is the last time you'll ever see me, Mia. I'm the architect, remember? And I just removed the rot from my foundation." I turned back to the minister, my expression transitioning seamlessly into one of serene, bridal joy. Behind me, I heard Mia stumble back into line, the soft rustle of her silk bridesmaid gown sounding like a collapse. She was a hollow shell, standing in the center of a high society dream that was no longer her playground. She had tried to stain my life, but all she had managed to do was highlight her own ugliness in a room full of light. "I do," I said when the time came, my voice echoing through the chapel with a strength that moved the very air. I wasn't just promising myself to Julian, I was promising myself to a life where every pillar was honest and every wall was true. As Julian leaned in to kiss me, the guests erupted into applause. In that wall of sound, the 15-year debt was cancelled. The sabotage had failed. The masterpiece was intact. And as we turned to walk back down the aisle, I didn't look at Mia once. I didn't need to. You don't look back at a building after you've successfully demolished it, you look forward to the view. The vintage silver convertible glided down the long, winding driveway of the Vesta estate, the tires crunching over the white gravel with a sound like shattering glass. Behind us, the mansion sat atop the hill, a sprawling monument to a day that had been designed to break me, but had only succeeded in fortifying my resolve. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the vineyards, and for the first time in 15 years, the air I breathed felt completely clean. Julian sat beside me, his hand resting over mine on the leather center console. He didn't ask for a play-by-play of the final confrontation, he didn't need to. He had seen the way Mia had withered at the altar, and he had seen the way I had walked away from her without a single glance backward. He knew that the woman sitting next to him wasn't just his wife, she was the architect of her own liberation. As the estate gates disappeared in the rearview mirror, my phone chimed in my lap. I didn't even have to look at the screen to know who it was. The notification bubble showed a string of frantic, panicked messages. "Olivia, please. We need to talk." I was just stressed. I didn't mean it. You can't just cut me off like this. After everything we've been through? Lev? Answer me. I looked at the words, and for the first time, they had no power. They weren't the words of a sister or a friend, they were the desperate scratchings of a parasite that had finally run out of a host. Mia wasn't mourning our friendship, she was mourning the loss of the rent-free apartment, the designer hand-me-downs, and the security of a woman she could blame for her own failures. I tapped on her contact name. The 15-year debt was over. I scrolled to the bottom of the screen and pressed the button. Block this caller. With one quiet click, the digital link was severed. No more 3 a.m. crises. No more backhanded compliments. No more accidental spills. I felt a physical weight lift from my chest, a structural load-bearing burden that I had carried until my own foundation had nearly cracked. You okay? Julian asked, his voice low and steady. Better than okay, I said, leaning my head back against the seat and letting the wind pull at my veil. I just realized something. What's that? I spent $25,000 on a dress, and double that on the flowers and the food, I said, looking at the diamond on my finger that sparkled with a fierce, unbreakable light. But the best thing I brought to this wedding didn't cost a dime. Julian smiled, knowing exactly where I was going. Your self-respect? Exactly, I replied. It's the only accessory that never goes out of style. We reached the main highway, the car accelerating into the open road that led toward the airport and a honeymoon in the Maldives, a world where Mia's shadow couldn't reach. I looked down at my gown, the real one, still pristine and shimmering in the twilight. It hadn't been ruined by ink or by envy. It had survived the sabotage, just as I had. In the distance, I saw a billboard for a luxury development, the kind of project I used to dream of designing. I realized then that my life was no longer about fixing old, crumbling structures. It was about building new ones. I was the architect, and for the first time, I was working with a clean site. The rot was gone, the debris had been cleared, and the view ahead was limitless. I reached into my bag, pulled out my sunglasses, and slid them into place. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I didn't look back at the life I had left behind. I simply closed my eyes, felt the warmth of Julian's hand, and let the wind carry the last traces of Mia's name into the dark. Please don't forget to subscribe.